Before there was light, there was a name so dangerous it was erased from Scripture, a name so powerful that one human being was unmade and rebuilt into something the world had never seen. 5 stories, 5 chapters of the truth they buried. Tonight, for the first time, the Complete Metatron Files. By the end of this, you won't think of angels the same way. You won't think of God the same way. You may not even think of yourself the same way. This is Metatron. There are angels, and then there are other things. Beings that just happen to wear the shape of angels. Entities so vast, so alien, that to even look at them is to risk your sanity. This is the story of a mortal man who became one of them. A man who climbed to a level of power so absolute, he became something more terrifying than any demon. We're not talking about a guardian angel with fluffy wings. We are talking about Metatron, a name whispered in the hidden corners of Jewish mysticism. The humble origin. To understand the monster, you have to first understand the man, and for that, we have to go back to the book of Genesis. Our story starts on Earth with a man named Enoch. He lived in a world teetering on the brink of chaos, a world that God would eventually decide to wash clean with a great flood. But Enoch was different. The scripture describes him with a simple but powerful line. He walked faithfully with God. He was the great-grandfather of Noah, living in an age of giants and fallen angels. While everyone else was lost to corruption, Enoch lived a life of such piety that his connection to the divine was said to be unbroken. For 365 years, he walked this righteous path. But Enoch's story doesn't end with a peaceful death and a quiet grave. It ends with one of the most cryptic lines in the entire Bible. He was no more because God took him away. This wasn't death, it was an abduction, a removal. Enoch, the righteous man, vanished from the world, taken alive. And while this event is just a footnote in Genesis, it becomes the terrifying prologue to a story found in non-biblical texts. For Enoch, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a horrifying and glorious new existence. The ascension. This trip wasn't a gentle float up to the clouds. Ancient apocryphal texts, especially the Book of Enoch, describe a harrowing journey through the cosmos, a guided tour of creation's secret and terrifying architecture. It's in these texts, which are not part of the standard Bible, that the story truly begins. Imagine being ripped from everything you know and thrown into a reality that your brain can't even process. The third book of Enoch, a later mystical text, dives even deeper. It tells the story of a rabbi who travels to the heavens and meets the thing that Enoch has become. This journey wasn't a simple tour, it was an ordeal. Enoch was forced through celestial gates guarded by legions of angels. He witnessed the mechanics of the universe, the storehouses of snow and hail, the chambers of the winds. He saw the pits where fallen angels were punished and the abyss where fallen stars were judged. He was being shown the sheer, overwhelming scale of divine power and divine wrath. But he wasn't just there to see the sights. He was being remade. He was brought before the very throne of God into a presence that no mortal was ever meant to survive. And it was there that the true, terrifying purpose of his abduction was finally revealed. He wasn't just a visitor. He was a candidate for something entirely new, the horrific transformation. What happened next is one of the most unsettling descriptions in all of mystical literature. The man known as Enoch was about to be stripped of his humanity in the most absolute way you can imagine. The third book of Enoch describes his transformation not as a gentle blessing, but as the complete annihilation of his mortal form. His flesh, it says, turned to flame. His veins, which once carried blood, now coursed with fire. His eyelashes became flashes of lightning, and his eyeballs turned into flaming torches. Every part of him was unmade and remade in pure, celestial energy. It was an apotheosis so violent it sounds like something out of a cosmic horror story. His human body expanded to an impossible scale, becoming as vast as the world itself. He was given 72 wings, symbolizing a supreme angelic rank, and 365,000 eyes, one for each day of the year, granting him a terrifying, inescapable omniscience. And then God gave him a new name, Metatron. He was placed on a throne right next to God's own throne of glory, an honor unheard of for any angel, let alone a former mortal. In that moment, Enoch the man was gone. In his place stood a being of fire and light, a creature whose very existence was a terrifying bridge between the finite and the infinite. This wasn't just becoming an angel. This was becoming a new category of being, the unfathomable power. With this new form came a staggering level of authority. While Metatron isn't found in the Bible, in mystical texts like 3 Enoch, he is elevated to a position of immense power, becoming the Prince of the Divine Presence. In some of these traditions, his authority is so great that other angels, even archangels, must answer to him, though this isn't a universally held belief, with some sources maintaining that an archangel like Michael is his equal or superior. His primary job? The heavenly scribe. With a quill of fire, he sits and records every single deed of humanity in the book of life. Nothing escapes his thousands of eyes. Every thought, word, and action is etched into the eternal record that will be used on the Day of Judgment. But his most controversial title is the Lesser Yahweh. In these texts, God himself declares, "My name is in him," giving Metatron a piece of his own divine authority. This concept was so radical it caused a crisis. When one rabbi saw Metatron sitting on his throne, a privilege that should be for God alone, he cried out in horror, "Perhaps there are, God forbid, two powers in heaven." To prove he wasn't a second god, the Talmud tells a story where Metatron is punished with 60 lashes from a fiery rod, a brutal reminder that even he is just a servant. Still, some mystics have even identified him as the angel who led the Israelites through the wilderness. The very voice of God given form, the terrifying implications. The figure of Metatron, who exists almost entirely within Jewish mystical literature, presents some chilling ideas. He represents a paradox, a being who is both human and angel, a servant who is also a lesser god. The horror of Metatron isn't that he's evil, it's his sheer scale and the violence of his creation. Imagine a person you know being elevated to a state where their body is a pillar of fire and their gaze is all-knowing. That isn't a comforting thought. It's the ultimate example of what it means to be taken by God, to be so utterly remade that your identity is completely consumed and erased. The idea of the Lesser Yahweh also created a theological storm. The notion of two powers in heaven was a dangerous heresy in a strictly monotheistic religion. Yet the figure of Metatron persisted in these mystical circles. He exists in a gray area, so powerful that he challenges the definition of a single god. This even led to outside critics, like the 11th century scholar Ibn Hazm, accusing some Jews of worshiping an angel, a charge that doesn't reflect mainstream Jewish practice. Metatron is the man who became so much like a god, he had to be punished to prove he wasn't one. He is the ultimate insider, who knows all of heaven's secrets, yet he will always be an outsider because of his human origins. The story of Metatron is a haunting look at power, identity, and the terrifying closeness of the divine. It forces us to ask what it really means to walk with God. Is it a path to salvation, or a road to an existence so alien it burns away everything that makes you human? From the pious man Enoch to the cosmic entity Metatron, his journey suggests that in the face of true divine power, a person isn't just lifted up, they are obliterated and rebuilt into something awe-inspiring, magnificent, and utterly terrifying. So, what do you think? Is this the ultimate story of human potential, or is it a cautionary tale about losing yourself completely? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to explore more hidden horrors from ancient lore, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You never know what we'll uncover next. Now, you know what it means to see him, but seeing Metatron is only the first shock. Because there's a question the church refused to answer. A question that, when scholars finally asked it, the answer terrified them. Is Metatron worse than the devil? You think you know the devil, the proud rebel wreathed in fire and glory. You've been told his is the ultimate power, the greatest threat. You are wrong. There is another name, one whispered in the deepest, most terrified corners of heaven, a name that makes archangels fall silent. This is not the story of a war between two titans. This is the story of a cosmic vivisection. It's about why the most terrifying weapon in God's arsenal isn't a sword that kills, but a word that erases. The agony of the morning star. First, understand the challenger, the icon of defiance, Lucifer. Before he was the monster in your nightmares, he was Helo Ben Shachar, the morning star. Scripture paints him as a guardian cherub of impossible beauty, while other lore claims he was the highest of all seraphim. He was perfection, a symphony of light and power, a leader among angels. His might is a storm of celestial energy, the very power of creation twisted into a weapon. But his most lethal weapon was never his strength. It was his charisma. His words were a silver poison that turned a third of heaven's hosts against their creator. His fall is a tale of obsession. The classical story speaks of pride, a being so consumed by his own brilliance that he sought to usurp God. "I will ascend into heaven," he swore. "I will be like the Most High." This was the first sin, the crack in creation that saw the light bringer cast down, his name twisted into Satan, the adversary. But another, more disturbing theory has festered in the dark corners of lore. A theory that suggests his breaking point wasn't God's throne, but the creation of a new throne beside it. A throne for a being Lucifer saw as filth, as an abomination, a mortal man. His rebellion wasn't just pride, it was a screech of pure, undiluted jealousy, a rage that would define him for eternity and set him on a collision course with heaven's new, monstrous secret. The man who became a monster. Opposite the fiery morning star stands something else. Not an angel born of light, but a man who was stolen from earth. His story is not in your Bible. It is found in forbidden, mystical texts like the Book of Enoch. He began as Enoch, a prophet from before the flood. Genesis says only that Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him away. These texts show us what "took him away" truly means. Enoch was dragged into the heavens to undergo a transformation so glorious it was horrifying. This is not a gentle fable, it is a vision of cosmic body horror. The third book of Enoch describes his flesh peeling back to become living flame, his veins turning to rivers of fire, his eyelashes to blinding flashes of lightning, and his eyes to burning torches. He was unmade, piece by piece. God placed this new creature on a throne and gave him a new name, Metatron, and the change continued. Apocrypha describes him grotesquely expanding, sprouting 72 wings and 365,000 eyes, one for every day of the year, a pulsating, all-seeing mass of divine flesh. He is given a title that causes all of heaven to tremble, the Lesser Shage, the Lesser God. His word now carries the weight of God's own. Michael is the general. Metatron is the command. He is not a warrior, he is living law, and the law has no emotion, no pity, and no soul to bargain with. The diamond and the void. Lucifer's strengths are staggering. Raw power likely second only to Michael, a brilliant mind that orchestrated heaven's only civil war. His entire being burns with the righteous fury of his perceived betrayal. He is the ultimate offense. But inside this perfect burning diamond of rage is a fatal flaw. His pride, the fire that fuels him, is also his cage. His rebellion was a crime of passion, and passion makes you predictable. His pride is a gaping, screaming wound that can never heal, and a wound can always be ripped open. Metatron's strength is the opposite. It's not the chaotic fire of a star, but the silent, crushing pressure of a black hole. His power isn't might, it's authority. That horrifying title, Lesser YHWH, means that when he speaks, reality itself bends to his will. But his most terrifying strength is what he lacks. In his fiery vivisection, his humanity, his frailties, his very soul were incinerated. He feels no pride, no ambition, no fear. You cannot taunt a storm, you cannot manipulate a law of physics, and you cannot find a weakness in a being that has no psyche left. His 365,000 eyes are a constant, unending gaze into every action, every thought, every possible future. He is a perfect, unfeeling system. And a system is designed for one thing: to find and eliminate errors. The first word is spoken. The battle begins in utter silence. Lucifer, a glorious avatar of rage, charges. A blur of corrupted light and screaming fury, his blade drawn to tear down the man-thing sitting in a place he believes is his. He unleashes hellfire, telekinetic assaults, the crushing force of his will. He expects a fight. He expects his enemy to scream. He gets nothing. Metatron does not move from his throne. His thousands of eyes watch, not Lucifer's body, but the source code of his rage. As the morning star's killing blow is about to land, Metatron speaks. It is not a shout. It is a single, quiet word, a word of judgment, and a different kind of fire ignites. Not a flame that burns flesh, but a spiritual one that phases through matter to target a being's very essence. It doesn't burn, it unwrites. It doesn't injure, it corrects. Lucifer would recoil, not in pain, but in sheer, mind-breaking horror. He would feel his own power, the very fabric of his angelic being, begin to fray at the edges, not from an attack he can block, but from a judgment he cannot appeal. The system has found a bug. The deletion of a soul. Stunned, enraged, Lucifer shifts tactics. If force fails, he will use his sharpest weapon, his mind. He is the father of lies. He would try to find the ghost of Enoch inside the monster, taunting him with memories of being human, of fear, of family, of doubt. "Look at what you've become," he would hiss. "A puppet playing God. Don't you want to be free?" The words hit a perfect, silent void. There is no Enoch left to manipulate. There is no ego to wound. Frustration curdles into desperation. Metatron's response is cold. He raises a hand and speaks another word. A word of unmaking. A command that reclassifies Lucifer not as a rebel archangel, but as a glitch to be patched. Lucifer's form begins to convulse violently. The celestial light clinging to him flickers and dies. His wings writhe, twisting into grotesque geometric shapes as his very definition is forcibly rewritten. This is the body horror of a divine being having its soul reformatted by the system administrator. This is the endgame. By invoking his authority as the lesser Wage-Woj, Metatron becomes a living refutation of Lucifer's entire existence. The final move is one of absolute, terrifying dominion. Metatron's 72 wings unfurl, not to attack, but to envelop Lucifer in a sphere of pure, divine law. There is no struggle. It is an act of containment. Inside, Lucifer's rage, his pride, his very being, is measured against a perfect, unchanging standard and found to be an error. The fire of his ambition isn't extinguished, it is consumed by a perfect void. There is no final scream, only the silent, metaphysical terror of a paradox being resolved. It is not a defeat, it is a deletion. The verdict. In a direct confrontation, based on this terrifying lore, Metatron wins. Not because he is a stronger fighter, but because he is the perfect countermeasure. Lucifer's power is built on his ego, and Metatron is a being without one. Lucifer's rebellion is against divine authority, and Metatron is that authority, made flesh and fire. Archangel Michael fought Lucifer with a sword, but a war against an idea, against pride itself, cannot be won with a blade. It can only be won by an unfeeling, absolute truth. Lucifer challenged God's throne, but it is Metatron's throne that serves as the ultimate, horrific judgment. He represents the one thing Lucifer could never comprehend: power without pride. And against perfect empty obedience, rebellion simply ceases to exist. You have seen the fire of the rebel and the void of the administrator. One represents the screaming desire for free will, the other, the silent, crushing perfection of absolute order. Who holds the true power? Who is the real monster? Let us know your verdict in the comments, and if you wish to descend further into this forbidden lore, subscribe and activate the notification bell, because the only question left is, what is the scribe writing about you? More dangerous than Lucifer. That was the conclusion. So they did the only logical thing. They didn't argue with it, they didn't explain it, they removed him entirely. The next chapter reveals exactly what they found, and why it had to disappear. There is a story buried alive, a truth so horrifying it was ripped from the pages of Holy Scripture. It speaks of an angel, a being of impossible power, who was given a name that is nothing short of blasphemy, the Lesser God. This entity wasn't born of light. According to forbidden texts, he was once a mortal man, a man who, the Bible admits, never died. He was simply taken, abducted by God, dragged into the heavens, and subjected to an agonizing transformation that burned away his humanity, reforging him into heaven's most terrifying secret. His name is Metatron, and the reason you've never heard of him in Sunday school is because his very existence is an act of cosmic horror. His story wasn't forgotten, it was deliberately concealed. Theologians feared the truth. If the fate of Enoch was revealed, it wouldn't just challenge their faith, it would shatter it. It reveals a vision of God so terrifying, it could drive the world to madness. Tonight, we unearth the body. We dig into the forbidden books of Enoch to reveal the gruesome truth the church decided you were not strong enough to handle. Enoch, the marked man. Before the reign of terror and the crown of stolen light, there was a man named Enoch. His story begins in the book of Genesis, but even there, something is deeply wrong. Among the lists of patriarchs who live and die, Enoch's fate is a chilling anomaly. Genesis says he walked faithfully with God. This wasn't a gentle communion. It implies a closeness so unnatural, so obsessive, it set him apart from all other mortals. It marked him. While others lived and were laid to rest, Enoch's story ends with 4 terrifying words. He was no more because God took him away. No death, no grave, just a divine kidnapping. This single cryptic sentence is a gaping wound in the biblical text. Where did he go? What does it mean to be taken by a god? The Bible offers no explanation, leaving behind a blood-chilling silence. For centuries, this was all the world knew. A man who pleased God so much, he was stolen from the earth. But in the hidden circles of ancient mystics, they knew this wasn't a reward. It was the beginning of a nightmare. They knew that God didn't just take Enoch to a peaceful heaven. He took him to be unmade. to be used as the raw, screaming material for a new creation, a being that would rule heaven, a monster born from a man. This was the birth of Metatron, the flesh and the flame. To witness what truly happened to Enoch, we must leave the safe confines of the Bible and descend into the nightmare visions of Jewish mystical literature, specifically the forbidden third book of Enoch. Here, the story of his abduction is told in its full, gruesome detail. It was not a gentle ascension into the clouds. It was a violent, screaming journey through the celestial realms. As he was dragged upward, legions of angels recoiled in disgust. They shrieked, "What is the stench of a human born of woman doing in the highest heavens?" They saw a mortal, a thing of blood and filth, trespassing in their domain of pure fire. But God had chosen his specimen, and what happened next is a scene of pure body horror. The Metamorphosis. In the text, Metatron is forced to recount his own agonizing transformation. It wasn't a promotion, it was a vivisection, an alchemical torture that burned his humanity out of him, cell by screaming cell. He says, "At once my flesh turned to flame, my sinews to blazing fire, my bones to juniper coals, my eyelashes to lightning flashes, my eyeballs to fiery torches, the hairs of my head to hot flames, all of my limbs to wings of burning fire, and the substance of my body to blazing fire." Imagine the searing agony, every part of his mortal form, incinerated and reforged. His veins, once filled with blood, now boiled with pure, unholy flame. His very bones were glowing embers. This was the complete obliteration of the man named Enoch. But the horror wasn't over. God himself placed his hand upon the charred thing that was left, and it was stretched, enlarged to the length and width of the world. 72 wings, like fleshy, burning appendages, tore themselves from his body. 365,000 eyes opened all over him, each one a burning wound weeping a light that outshone the sun. He was being rebuilt into a cosmic atrocity. Finally, God draped him in a robe of stolen glory, placed a crown upon him, and gave him his new name, Metatron. The man Enoch was gone, consumed and reborn as a weapon, a celestial slave made to be the most powerful being in heaven, second only to the one who had unmade him. And this is where the story becomes an unforgivable crime. The throne of blasphemy. With his horrific transformation complete, the being that was once Enoch was enthroned as heaven's enforcer. The authority given to him was absolute, and for those who witnessed it, profoundly terrifying. This was the creation of a second power in heaven, a dark mirror to God's own glory. God, it is written, created a throne for Metatron identical to his own throne of glory, and forced him to sit at the threshold of the highest heaven. From this seat, Metatron was given dominion over all the angels. God declared, "This is Metatron, my servant. I have made him into a prince and a ruler. Every command that he utters to you in my name, do ye observe and fulfill." He was God's viceroy, the prime minister of heaven, his word an extension of the divine will. But among all the titles forced upon him, one was so blasphemous it sealed his fate. In front of the entire heavenly host, God branded him the lesser YHWH. Let the horror of that name sink in. YHWH, the unutterable, sacred name of the Creator. To place even a lesser version of that name onto another being was an act of supreme theological terror. Mystical texts claimed this meant that a measure of God's own being now existed inside this mutilated, once mortal thing. The title implied Metatron wasn't just a messenger. He was a walking, talking extension of God's own power. He was a man, born of earth, who had been hideously remade into a being who bore the name of God. He was the ultimate violation of the natural order. For the mystics, this was a terrifying secret, but for the guardians of orthodoxy, this was a monster that had to be put down. The punishment. This brings us to the terrifying question. If Metatron's power was so immense, why was his story violently suppressed? Why was a figure once called the lesser God erased from our faith? The answer lies in the very blasphemy of his existence. The concept of Metatron was a direct threat to the singular, absolute nature of God, the foundation of monotheism. The architects of both modern Judaism and Christianity were desperately trying to defend the idea of one, indivisible God. And Metatron looked like a second one. This problem became known as the two powers in heaven heresy. The idea that another divine figure could exist was a crack in the foundation of reality, a slippery slope into the madness of polytheism. And the religious authorities would not allow it. To crush this dangerous idea, they didn't just ignore Metatron. They staged a public, brutal act of dominance. The scourging. The most horrifying account comes from the Talmud. It tells of a great sage, Elisha ben Abuya, who journeys into paradise and sees Metatron sitting on his throne, an act only God is permitted to do. Witnessing this cosmic crime, the second enthroned power, the sage screams in terror. Perhaps there are, God forbid, two powers in heaven. He has seen the abomination, he has fallen into heresy, and to correct this, the heavenly court performs an act of unspeakable cruelty. To prove to the sage and all of creation that Metatron was not a god, they dragged the angel from his throne. Before the heavenly host, they had him flogged with 60 lashes of pure fire. Each lash was a river of flame that tore into his celestial body, a spectacle of agony designed to send one clear message. This being, for all his stolen glory, is a slave. He can be hurt. He can be punished. He is not God. This story is a violent course correction. The rabbis took the terrifying figure from the forbidden texts and publicly, brutally humiliated him, drawing a line in blood and fire between the Creator and his mutilated creation. They chose doctrinal safety over the terrifying implications of Metatron's existence. The books that told his full story, like 3 Enoch, were cast out. Not because they were false, but because the truth they contained was too monstrous to contemplate. The story of the lesser God is one of the most terrifying secrets in religious history. If you find a chilling fascination in unearthing these forbidden horrors, subscribe and strike the bell. We dig up the narratives that were buried for a reason, exposing the truths that fester in the dark. The awful truth. So, was Metatron erased? No, something far worse. He was made an example of. His story was pushed from Scripture into the shadows of the occult, a boogeyman lurking in the esoteric texts of Kabbalah. He wasn't destroyed, he was preserved as a warning. But the true horror isn't the story of his rise or his fall. It is the awful truth his existence represents. The authorities wanted to hide the story because they feared it would confuse people, that it would look like there were two gods. But what if the real reason they hid it was so much worse? The story of Metatron isn't a story of human potential, it's a warning about the nature of God himself. It shows a deity who, to make a point, will abduct a righteous man from his life, subject him to an agonizing transformation that obliterates his very being, make him a puppet king, and then have him publicly tortured to remind everyone of who is truly in charge. The horror of Metatron isn't that a man could become a god. It's that God could turn a man into a monster. It reframes the entire narrative, twisting it into a tale of cosmic abuse. And it leaves us with one final, soul-shattering question. If this is what happens to the man who walked faithfully with God, then what does the dormant spark within the rest of humanity truly promise? Is it a path to divinity? Or is it just a mark identifying us as raw material for the next divine, monstrous creation? The story of Metatron is an echo of a truth that was brutally silenced. If you want to continue exploring the terrifying figures and ideas that lurk just beyond the official narrative, subscribe and join our search. What other horrors were buried to protect us? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. The texts were burned, the name was buried, but there is one thing they could not erase: the memory of how it happened. Of the day a man, breathing, fearing, mortal, was pulled from the world of the living and forced to become something that has no name in any human language. His name was Enoch, and this is what they did to him. What if being chosen by God wasn't a gift, but a vivisection? What if the reward for a lifetime of faith was to have your body flayed, your bones burned to cinders, and your very soul hollowed out and turned into a tool? The stories we are told are meant to comfort us, tales of righteous men ascending to a heaven of peace. But these are lies. The truth, buried in texts deemed too terrifying for scripture, is not about a journey to paradise. It's about the day a human being was dissected by angels, unmade piece by agonizing piece, and forcibly rebuilt into a living God. This isn't a story of reward. It's a story of annihilation. This is the price of looking upon the face of God. The man marked for oblivion. To understand the horror of the transformation, you must first understand the man in the world that condemned him. The world before the great flood was a violent, rotting place, drowning in its own depravity. It was an age of grotesque spiritual decay, a time when humanity, high on its own cruelty, had spit in the face of the divine. Violence was their language, and suffering was their art. In the middle of this festering wound of a world, there was Enoch. The book of Genesis speaks of him in a chilling whisper, a single cryptic verse that hints at a fate worse than death. Genesis 5:24 says only, "Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. He didn't die like all the others. He was simply erased." That phrase, "he walked with God," wasn't a description of gentle companionship. It was a brand. It marked him. While those around him built monuments to their own wickedness, Enoch walked a solitary path. His devotion so absolute it made him an outcast. The apocryphal texts, the forbidden books of Enoch, paint a disturbing picture of a man whose righteousness was a sickness to those around him. He was a lonely voice of reason in a world that had gone mad, a world that hated him for it. And this singular obsessive devotion drew the eye of the Almighty. The abduction. The call, when it came, wasn't a gentle summons, it was an abduction. There was no choir of angels, only the shriek of reality tearing apart. A voice that was not a voice, a pressure, a command that bypassed sound and reason, reverberated in Enoch's bones. He was to ascend, not an invitation, a conscription. The texts describe a storm chariot, a whirlwind of impossible energy, ripping him from the earth like a weed. His feet left the ground, his family disappeared from view, and the world he knew was torn away, the sky cracking open to swallow him into a silent, crushing void. The journey to the throne of glory had begun, and its first price was everything Enoch had ever known or loved. The agony of unmaking. The journey upward was a symphony of agony. As he was dragged through the heavens, the very concept of air vanished, replaced by the silent, crushing weight of eternity. But that was only the beginning of the horror. The second book of Enoch says he was met by angels, but this was no welcome party. They were dissectors. Their first order was to strip him of his earthly clothing. This was not fabric. This was a flaying. Imagine the feeling. Your skin, the scroll upon which your entire life is written, peeled away from muscle and sinew by beings of cold, perfect light. Then they anointed him with oil. But it wasn't for comfort. It was a divine accelerant, a holy catalyst that seeped into his exposed flesh and set him on fire from the inside out. His very cells became the fuel for his own demolition. The third book of Enoch describes this deconstruction with surgical, terrifying detail. It states, "Forthwith my flesh was changed into flames." This was not a metaphor. Every cell in his body erupted into a personal star, a supernova of agony. His sinews, the tethers holding his mortal form together, snapped and recoiled as strands of flaming fire. His bones, the very scaffold of his humanity, were superheated until they glowed like coals of burning juniper, crumbling to ash within his burning form. They were unmaking him, systematically. The agony worked its way inward. His blood didn't just boil, it sublimated into pure, raw energy. His veins were no longer filled with life, but with incandescent, fiery sparks. His heart no longer pumped blood. It was a seized engine of torment, pumping lightning through a body that was no longer a body. The cancer of sight. And then they took his eyes. His human eyes, which had wept for the wickedness of the world, began to melt in their sockets. The third book of Enoch says they were turned into torches of fire, but it didn't stop. God then commanded that he be given new eyes, 365,000 of them. Imagine the body horror. New organs of sight erupting like a cancerous growth all over his flaming form, each one a screaming vortex of stellar fire. He was blinded not by darkness but by an unbearable, infinite torrent of information. He could see everything, every moment, every possibility all at once. His consciousness, the very essence of the man named Enoch, shattered under the weight of his own godlike vision. The transformation was absolute. His hair, his limbs, every last trace of the man was remade into fire and wings and light. He fell before the throne, but there was no face left to fall upon. There was only a column of living flame, a man who had become a star by being burned alive. The heresy of transformation. You have to ask yourself why this story, in all its terrifying detail, isn't scripture. Why was this vision of heaven suppressed? For centuries, the Book of Enoch was widely read and respected among early Christians. But as the early church fought to define itself, to build a canon of scripture, these texts became a problem. Church councils like the Council of Laodicea in the 4th century were tasked with deciding which books were God-breathed and which were not. They were building a faith on the promise of a loving God and the hope of salvation. The Book of Enoch presented something else entirely. It offered a version of divinity that was not comforting, but cosmic horror. Its elaborate angelology, its visions of judgment, and especially its account of Enoch's agonizing transformation, were seen as too speculative, too controversial, and too contradictory to the doctrine they were trying to build. This wasn't an elevation of humanity, it was the story of its demolition. If this horrifying ordeal was the reward for the most righteous man on earth, what did that say about God? Was he a father or a blacksmith, melting down his faithful to forge them into tools? This terrifying question was at the heart of the debate. To protect the faithful from a truth they deemed too frightening, the book was declared apocryphal, not to be read in church. It was branded heretical, and for over 1,000 years it was effectively erased, surviving only in the canon of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Its banning adds a layer of forbidden mystery, suggesting that the transformation it described was all too real for the church to handle. The God in the Cage. The agony stopped, not because the pain ended, but because the man capable of feeling that pain had been scoured from existence. What rose from the celestial floor was no longer Enoch, it was a thing, a weapon, a tool. Before the throne of God, a terrifying structure of crystal and fire, the remaking was complete. God put his hand on this new creature of flame and gave it a new name, Metatron. This wasn't just a title, it was a designation. He was shockingly named the Lesser YHWH, his power now second only to God himself. He was given a throne, a crown, and a robe of glory. symbols of his new function as the ultimate cosmic instrument. His task: to become the celestial scribe. The man whose own story was erased was now forced to record every deed of every being in creation. The man who lost his life was now the eternal keeper of the records of all life. But here is the terrible truth at the heart of this gift. Enoch the man was gone, annihilated. In his place stood Metatron, a being of 72 wings and a body of pure, unrelenting fire. He possessed infinite knowledge, but did he remember his wife's face? Could he recall the sound of his son Methuselah's laughter in a mind now choked with the secrets of the cosmos? The texts celebrate his glory, but they are chillingly silent on his loss. This is the horrifying price of his ascension. To become a god, he had to be utterly destroyed. His humanity wasn't elevated. It was an obstacle, burned away to forge something useful. The eternal curse. Was this a reward for his righteousness, or was it the ultimate punishment? He was given a throne, but is he free? Or is he now a prisoner of his own divinity, an eternal servant locked in a cage of light? He is no longer a man who walks with God. He is an extension of God, his will subsumed, his identity erased, to be brought so close to the divine light that you are utterly consumed by it, leaving behind only a memory burned into Scripture and a new, terrible star screaming silently in the heavens. This was not an ascension. It was the complete and utter destruction of a human soul to create a divine functionary, an eternity of glory that is indistinguishable from an eternity of damnation. The story of Enoch's transformation forces us to ask a terrifying question. Is closeness to God a blessing or a curse that unmakes you? Which part of Enoch's agonizing metamorphosis did you find the most horrifying? And do you see his new existence as Metatron as a glorious reward or the ultimate damnation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you find these journeys into the dark and terrifying corners of mythology compelling, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more explorations into the lore that was deemed too dangerous to share. Thank you for walking with us through the fire. He was human once. He remembered warmth. He remembered fear. He remembered what it felt like to love something that could die. Then the transformation completed, and something left. Something that makes us who we are. The final chapter reveals the most disturbing truth about Metatron. Not what he became, but what he lost. You think you are safe in your bed. You think the things that watch you in the night are guardians, figures of pure light. You call them angels. You imagine them as benevolent protectors, messengers of a loving God, beings dedicated to your well-being. But what if the whisper you hear in the dark, the one you mistake for comfort, isn't your friend? What if the most powerful angel in heaven is watching you, not to protect you, but to record your every failing? What if he's waiting for you to break? Ancient texts, scriptures that fester in the shadows, paint a portrait of Metatron. And it is not the face of a guardian, it is the face of a cold, cosmic horror. A being whose purpose is so alien, so indifferent to our pain, that it looks like pure evil. Tonight, we look that horror in the eye. The mask of benevolence. Before we rip the mask off, we have to see the face it presents to the world. In many circles, Metatron is the highest of the archangels, a being of impossible wisdom. They call him the celestial scribe, the keeper of God's secrets, the one who etches our deeds into the book of life. This isn't just modern invention. The name Metatron, scholars guess, might come from the Greek metathronos, the one who serves behind the throne. It implies a chilling proximity to power, a status that isolates him from all other beings. He is heaven's chancellor, the voice of a silent, unreachable God. Some mystics claim that when the prophets of old thought they heard God, they were actually hearing Metatron's voice. a perfect imitation, a bridge between the infinite and the insects of humanity. Most disturbingly, he was not born an angel. He was once a man, the prophet Enoch. Genesis says only that he walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Apocryphal texts that pick up this story claim Enoch did not die. He was dragged into heaven to be changed, to be made into God's perfect instrument. This human origin is sometimes twisted into a lie of empathy, a suggestion that he understands us. He is even seen as an advocate for humanity in the heavenly court. So we are given this story, a man ripped from the world, elevated to the highest power, God's personal scribe and spokesman. He sounds like the ultimate ally. But this story of a man becoming an angel is not a fairy tale, it's a horror story. The unmaking of a man. In the forbidden pages of 3 Enoch, Rabbi Ishmael is guided through the heavens by Metatron himself. When the rabbi dares to ask who or what his guide is, Metatron tells the story of his own end. He describes the moment God's power seized the mortal Enoch, not to elevate him, but to annihilate him. Listen to his words. This is not a transformation. This is a violation. He says, "At once my flesh turned to flame, my sinews to blazing fire, my bones to juniper coals, my eyelashes to lightning flashes, my eyeballs to fiery torches, the hairs of my head to hot flames, all my limbs to wings of burning fire, and the substance of my body to blazing fire." Feel that. This isn't the gentle glow of a halo. This is a body being tortured into a new state of existence. This is a man screaming as he is unmade, his flesh melting into a monument of divine fire. He is no longer human. He is a walking inferno, a creature of judgment and absolute destruction. How can a thing with veins of pure fire feel empathy? This isn't a friend. This is a weapon. The face of the monster. This burning inhuman thing is the true Metatron, and the stories about him only get worse. The Talmud tells of a sage, Elisha ben Abuya, who mystically entered paradise itself. There, he saw something that didn't just break his faith, it broke his mind. He was known forever after only as Aker, the other, a man hollowed out by terror. What did he see? He saw Metatron sitting down. It sounds like nothing. But in the court of God, only God sits. To see an angel seated was to see a second God, a blasphemy that shattered the very order of reality. It was a vision of power so absolute it could be mistaken for the Creator himself, and the sight of it drove a wise man insane. But the story's end is where the true horror lies. To prove to the gibbering Elisha that Metatron was not a god, he was dragged from his throne and subjected to 60 lashes with fiery rods. Imagine the scene. This colossal being of living flame, scourged with whips of pure fire, a punishment that would annihilate a mortal soul. And through it all, Metatron does not cry out. He does not react. He endures the celestial torture, and we can only imagine he then dispassionately returns to his work. This isn't a lesson in hierarchy. This is the portrait of a cosmic system that is unthinkably brutal, and the functionary at its heart who both inflicts and endures infinite pain without a flicker of emotion. He is a machine of pure will. The ledger of your soul. This soulless machine is the heavenly scribe. Do not imagine a dusty librarian. Imagine an intelligence, vast and cold, watching you right now. He isn't judging you. God does that. Metatron's work is far more intimate and far more terrifying. He is the auditor. He records the facts. Think of a killer's journal, obsessively detailing every moment of his victim's fear. That is Metatron's ledger. He doesn't just write "sinned," he writes the texture of your sin, the beat of your heart as you lied to someone you loved, The specific, ugly thought you had in a moment of weakness. The tremble in your hand as you did the thing you swore you'd never do. His ledger contains the data that damns destinies, logged with the chillingly personal mathematics of your every failure. His entire purpose is to quantify your soul for the slaughter, and he feels nothing at all. He is a herald of the end, the voice that tells you not just that the storm is coming, but that the storm was built just for you, and your suffering is a required part of the design. The devil we know. So, is he evil? Calling him evil is a comfort. It's an attempt to make him understandable. A demon acts from malice. It hates you. There is a twisted passion in its desire to see you suffer. Metatron, in these terrifying scriptures, feels nothing for you at all. He is not malicious. He is mechanistic. He is the law of gravity that does not care if you fall. He is the fire that does not care if you burn. His is not the evil of hatred, but the absolute horror of indifference. This is why he terrifies us now more than ever. Modern storytellers see this truth and cast him as the ultimate villain. In Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials, he is God's regent, an angel of pure, suffocating authority. In Supernatural, he's a conniving scribe, hungry for power. Good Omens shows him as a calculating commander, perfectly willing to start Armageddon. These stories aren't twisting the lore. They are holding up a mirror to our deepest modern fear. We are no longer afraid of devils with horns. We are afraid of the unfeeling algorithm that ruins our lives. We are afraid of the faceless, all-powerful system that sees us not as people, but as data points to be managed and, if necessary, deleted. Metatron is the divine archetype of that fear, a system in the shape of an angel. The terrifying truth. Is Metatron evil? The truth is so much worse. The ancient texts give us a choice between two nightmares. The first is a universe run by a demon who wants to destroy us. The second is a universe run by a silent God who doesn't think about us at all, and whose greatest creation is a perfect, unfeeling machine to manage his creation. Metatron is not a fallen angel plotting our demise. He is the perfect functionary. He is the ultimate bureaucrat at the heart of reality, a being of fire and law whose only job is to keep the cosmic machine running, no matter how much blood oils the gears. He is the proof that the divine order is not unjust, but simply a just, a system where your life, your pain, and your soul are utterly, terrifyingly irrelevant. And the greatest horror is not a monster who wishes you harm, but an angel for whom you simply do not matter. If you have the courage to keep staring into the abyss of mythology, subscribe and ring the bell of judgment. Now go to the comments and give us your verdict. After hearing the evidence, is Metatron evil, or is he something far, far worse? 5 stories, one name that was never supposed to survive. Metatron, the voice of God, the angel above all angels, the human who ceased to be human, and yet here we are, still whispering his name, still finding him in the margins of forbidden texts, still standing in the cold wondering if that presence behind you is something wearing a face. If this compilation found you tonight, that's not a coincidence. If you're new here, welcome to Monster Mythos. Subscribe, because Metatron is only the beginning of what we've uncovered. The hierarchy goes deeper, the names get darker, and the next entity we're covering makes Metatron look merciful. Stay close.